The Convair B-36 was the largest bomber that has ever gone into service with the U.S. Air Force. During the late 1940s and early 1950s, the B-36 was America's primary strategic bomber. The giant plane, known as the Peacemaker, served primarily as a strategic deterrent. The B-36 never saw any combat, although some B-36 reconnaissance aircraft flew some rather hazardous missions near or perhaps even over Soviet territory during the height of the Cold War in the mid-1950s. During World War II, the primary American bomber was the B-29. It was a very long-range plane, but was not able to cross oceans. The origin of the B-36 can be traced back to the early days of 1941, at a time when it seemed that Britain might fall to a German invasion, depriving the USA of any European allies in case of war, and in particular, leaving the Army Air Corps without any bases outside the Western Hemisphere. Consequently, the Air Corps felt it would need a truly intercontinental bomber with unprecedented range, one that could bomb targets in Europe from bases inside the continental United States. Once the war began, the B-29 would be the longest-range bomber in the U.S. arsenal. In the spring of 1943, China appeared near collapse in its war against invading Japanese forces, and the Air Force was faced with the unpleasant prospect of the loss of its bases in China, from which it planned to launch B-29 raids against Japan. It might turn out that the longer-ranged B-36 would be the only means of attacking the Japanese home islands if bases nearer Japan could not be secured. In June, the Air Force directed that orders be placed for 100 production examples. By mid-1944, the military situation in the Pacific had improved materially. The Marianas Campaign was near its end, and preparation was being made for the deployment of B-29s from these bases to attack the Japanese mainland. The B-29's difficulties were now well on their way to solution, and it was felt that a super long-range bomber was not so urgently needed, and that Convair should devote its main effort to the B-32 program. Although the B-36 project would still continue, it would now do so with a lower priority. The contract for the 100 B-36s remained in effect, but no longer carried any priority rating. Following the surrender of Germany and the end of the war in Europe, aircraft production contracts were drastically cut back. However, the contract for the B-36 was untouched. The enormous losses suffered in seizing island bases in the Pacific convinced the Air Force that there was still a definite need for a long-range bomber. In addition, the atomic bomb would require a long-range delivery vehicle capable of retaliating against an enemy without the need for faraway forward bases. Because of the atomic bomb, strategic bombing took precedence. At that time, the B-36 was the only bomber capable of carrying out nuclear retaliation against an enemy without the need for overseas bases. However, at that time, the supply of atomic bombs was still sparse, and plans had to be made for the possible use of conventional bombs. Many felt that the B-36 was obsolete and should be canceled in favor of fast jet bombers. However, this strategy was inherently risky, since these jet bombers promised to have insufficient range and, in any case, would not be available for years. Still, others wanted to try and improve the performance of the B-36 and use it as an all-purpose bomber, capable of delivering both conventional and nuclear weapons. The Soviet blockade of Berlin helped bring home the necessity for having a powerful air force. It would be the power of the Allied air fleet that would save Berlin. This was a strong argument to keep the B-36. After prolonged debate, it was decided to stick with the basic B-36 as a special-purpose nuclear deterrent bomber. The B-36 would remain in service until replaced by the B-52. At that time, it was thought that 100 B-36s would be enough, and no further procurement was anticipated. Meanwhile, the Air Force would continue to modernize its fleet with jet aircraft. The new B-47 medium bomber would augment the B-36. The U.S. would be relying heavily on these new atomic forces to deter the Soviets, as conventional forces were reduced in strength. The technical development of the B-36 was a very long process. The size of the plane made building it complicated. The first XB-36 was rolled out on September 8, 1945. It sat on massive single 110-inch diameter main wheels, which restricted it to only 3 runways in the USA, which had sufficiently thick concrete to support the weight of the aircraft. The first XB flew on its maiden flight on August 8, 1946, remaining in the air for 37 minutes. It was the heaviest and largest land plane ever to fly up to that time. However, there were problems with the wing flap actuating system. Engine cooling was poor, and turbulent airflow off the wings caused propeller vibration, which adversely affected the wing structure. The aircraft's overall performance fell below the original expectations. The range was too short, and the speed was too low. Each of the 6 engines were to drive a 19-foot 3-bladed Curtiss propeller in pusher configuration. The engines were to be accessible for maintenance in flight through the 7-foot thick wing root. 6 fuel tanks with a capacity of 21,000 U.S. gallons were incorporated into the wing. The 163-foot fuselage had 4 separate bomb bays with a maximum capacity of 42,000 pounds. The early versions of the B-36 have been criticized for insufficient maximum speed and for a too long takeoff run. On October 5, 1948, Convair proposed that these problems could be addressed by the fitting of 2 pairs of turbojets in pods underneath the outer wings. These turbojets would be used for takeoff and for short bursts of speed during the bombing run, and would have only a minimal effect on the range. These changes resulted in the B-36D version. The B-36D featured 2 pairs of General Electric turbojets in pods underneath the outer wings to assist the 6 propeller engines. The jet engines increased the maximum speed to 435 miles per hour and the ceiling to more than 45,000 feet. They reduced the takeoff run by almost 2,000 feet. Like the B-29, only the forward crew compartment and the gunner's weapons sighting station compartment behind the bomb bay were to be pressurized. A 25-inch diameter, 80-foot-long pressurized tube ran alongside the bomb bays to connect the forward crew compartment to the rear gunner's compartment. Crewmen could use a wheeled trolley to slide back and forth. The crew consisted of 15: pilot, co-pilot, radar bombardier, navigator, flight engineer, 2 radio men, 3 forward gunners, and 5 rear gunners. 4 rest bunks were provided for reliefs. Defensive armament was to consist of 5 37mm cannon and 10 50 caliber machine guns. These guns were to be distributed among 4 retractable turrets and a radar-directed tail turret. The initial production version was the B-36A. They were used exclusively for training and crew conversion. The B-36B could carry up to 86,000 pounds of bombs. In addition, the B-36Bs were equipped from the start with 6 remotely operated retractable turrets, each equipped with a pair of 20mm cannon, plus 2 more 20mm cannon each in the nose and tail turrets. This was the most formidable armament yet fitted to any warplane. The guns were aimed by gunners operating computing gun sights situated at blisters mounted in the nose and at 6 side spots, 2 in the forward crew compartment, 4 in the rear. The tail guns were directed by radar. The B-36 was the subject of a lot of criticism. It had been accused of being as slow as the old B-24 Liberator of World War II and far more vulnerable. It had been claimed that even under the most favorable conditions, it would take up to 12 hours to get a B-36 aircraft ready for flight. Still, the aircraft was capable of very long-distance flights.
We'll go above the time trails and check very closely for any MiG aircraft that might come in above the time. Now, if you see MiGs up there today, call them out. Give their altitude, direction, and geographical location on the map. And call them out and get off the radio. Now remember, once you look around, keep your speed up, and if you do get a bounce, cut him off, and drive in range. When you get in range, shoot, and when you shoot, shoot to kill. Anybody got any questions? Okay, let's go again.
On December 5th, 1948, a long-range mission of 4,275 miles was flown at high altitude. Except for climb and descent, an average cruising speed of 303 miles per hour was maintained during the entire 14-hour flight at 40,000 feet. This was surpassed during a similar mission on December 12th, when the average speed rose to 319 miles per hour. In December 1948, a B-36B flew a 35.5-hour round-trip simulated bombing to Hawaii. On the way, the aircraft's 10,000-pound bomb load was dumped in the ocean a short distance from Hawaii. The total distance flown exceeded 8,000 miles. On January 29, 1949, a B-36B established a record bomb lift by taking a pair of dummy 42,000-pound Grand Slam bombs aloft at Muroc Air Force Base. The first was released at an altitude of 35,000 feet, the second from 40,000 feet. In March of 1949, a B-36B was used to establish a distance record of 9,600 miles, flown in 43 hours, 37 minutes. The last B-36B was accepted in September of 1950. war in Korea brought home to the Americans the immediate dangers of the Cold War. The Air Force was instrumental in helping in the fight against North Korean aggression. While the new American jet fighters went into action, the B-36 maintained the guard against the Soviets making any direct incursion. B-36s could stay at their bases on guard against any Soviet move. This was the time the Strategic Air Command developed its famed readiness. A series of radar stations was built across Canada to watch for Soviet bombers. A series of bases were developed in the States for the B-36's constant alerts and kept tensions high. The idea behind SAC was the concept of mutually assured destruction. The American bombers had to be capable to survive any first strike by the Russians and be able to deliver their bombs to the Soviet Union. For the first time in their history, Americans truly feared a serious attack in the U.S. homeland. The B-36s were sufficient in numbers to dissuade the Russians from any moves. In August and September of 1953, B-36s of the 92nd Heavy Bombardment Wing completed the first mass flight to the Far East, visiting bases in Japan, Okinawa, and Guam. This flight took place shortly after the hostilities ended in Korea and was an effort to demonstrate U.S. willingness to maintain operations in the Far East. This was the first time an entire B-36 wing had been deployed overseas. The B-36 flew well on 4 or even 3 engines, so it was common practice to shut down some of the engines during cruise. The turbojets were normally used only over the target area or for takeoff. The Air Force accepted a total of 383 B-36s, including prototypes, service test aircraft, and reconnaissance aircraft. One of the most unusual B-36 variants was the Flying Nuclear Reactor Test Bed. A B-36 was rigged for special tests designed to support research for nuclear power. The object of this particular conversion was to test the effects of nuclear reactor radiation on instruments, equipment, and airframe, and to study shielding methods. A nuclear reactor, which did not actually power the aircraft, was mounted in the aft bomb bay. The reactor was a 1,000 kilowatt design weighing 35,000 pounds. The crew was housed entirely in a modified compartment in the nose section composed of lead and rubber. A 4-ton lead disc shield was installed in the middle of the aircraft. Only the pilot and co-pilot could see out through the foot-thick leaded glass windshield. The atomic-powered aircraft project was abandoned in the late 1950s as being impractical. Another interesting variant was the FICON, the Fighter Conveyor Project, an early 1950s attempt to extend the range of fighter and reconnaissance jets by having them operate as parasites from B-36 bombers. An F-84E Thunderjet was modified to carry a hook on the upper nose ahead of its cockpit. During flight operations, the F-84E was to fly up underneath the B-36 and use its hook to engage a slot in the cradle. The F-84 would then be flown close to its target, where it would be released on its reconnaissance mission. It would then be recovered and fly home attached to the bomber. "25 RF-84F reconnaissance aircraft were modified to operate as parasite aircraft. 10 B-36D bombers were ordered modified to act as motherships. The program lasted until the advent of the U-2 spy plane. The end of B-36 service came quickly. The B-47 medium bomber was faster and more efficient than the B-36. It represented everything the B-36 was not. It had been designed and built with the jet age in mind. Its design was new. The B-36 was just the logical, if immense, extension of pre-World War II bomber design. Like the giant steam locomotives of the late 50s, they simply vanished almost overnight. By 1960, the B-36 was no more in the skies of the Cold War. But the Peacemaker had served well.